question, are you a human or more of an animal? Or an animal who also happens to be a human? Or a human who is an animal but also is like more than an animal? Put differently, what does it mean when we distinguish our humanity from our animality? And what does it mean to say that a human is acting like an animal?
These aren't people. These are animals.
He said the following: Ferguson riots have very little to do with the shooting of the young man. It is an excuse to be the losers these animals truly are.
They're animals, they're savages, they're terrorists.
Whether in the context of sports, politics, or TV and film, calling some humans animals is so common that it just stops being surprising. But why do people keep using animals as an insult against either individual humans or entire groups of people? And why do we all accept this as just a sort of normal thing to do? Well, we're gonna figure it out today in this video where we're gonna ask, are humans animals? Okay, before we get into it, I wanted to stop and tell you about a thing called Wisecrack Live. What is it? It's our weekly stream. Happens right here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. I hang out with my buddy, producer Henry. We have the best chat on YouTube, and I really mean that. And we talk about lots of stuff, things going on in popular culture, media, society, a little bit of a philosophical gloss over here, some detached humor over there. It's a very fun time, and I would love to see you there. So check it out, Wisecrack Live, right here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, so I'm sure at some point, we've all been accused of acting like an animal.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.
Whether we've been those drunk football fans or the guy scarfing down a 4-day-old pizza he found in a trash can on a public bus. At the core of these insults is the idea that when we strip away a person's culture, manners, and social expectations, they revert to pure savagery, which, to be clear, is a very not cool term we can unpack a bit more later. Philosopher Matthew Gutmann says that the comparison is most often used to categorize male behavior, which, as a male identifying person, I can say sounds very fair. Now, while historically the savage beast inside has been something to be repressed, recent influencers in the manosphere have encouraged men to embrace this primal nature. Also, if you're a part of the manosphere, I'm down to be an influencer there as well, you know? So if there's room for one more, let me in, because I'm ready to fight. When a human is called an animal, or dehumanized more broadly, we know that this has a cultural and not a biological meaning.
It's not like the kids are scared of them no more. Walking around with knives, great big dogs like they own the block. Excuse my French. They're fucking monsters, aren't they?
So what we're really talking about here are sets of constructed social values.
By the watering hole, and the animals are in heat.
Values that we apply to non-human animals. You know, we express shock when our sweet puppy Rufus all of a sudden shows his teeth and growls like a wolf when he's approached by a tiny little poodle at the dog park, because how could our goodest boy act like such a wild beast? And it's clear from the common use of these terms that we operate with the assumption that to be human is good and to be animal is bad. Acting human is to be cultured and moral, while acting like an animal is to be reckless and violent, gross and savage. So how did we begin using the term animal as an insult? And what's going on when we lob the term at folks who we don't like? So we can start by looking at the philosophical and political roots of the presumed human-animal distinction. And to be clear, there's a lot of this in the history of philosophy. We are just touching the tiniest part today. If you want to hear more about this, though, consider joining our Patreon. We have a level called Philosophy Office Hours, where you can ask me to expand on philosophical themes from our video, and I will, in special videos, just for you. Check it out, link in the description, etc. etc. Now, it won't be surprising that to start digging into the roots of this idea, we gotta head back to our old buddy Aristotle. Now, one of the ways that he understood living things was via their souls, and he thought there were three types: nutritive, perceptual, and intellectual. The first, nutritive, is the only type of soul that plants have. Now, they're living, but they aren't perceptual, meaning that the bag of arugula you got can't see the vinaigrette that you are just about to waterboard it with. And they aren't intellectual, because you know flowers don't have debates about the effects of postmodernism in literature, at least that we know of. Any flowers, I guess, spout off in the comments and let us know what you're thinking. Animals have more complex souls than plants, with both a nutritive and a perceptual part. This means that your dog, Rufus, is not only able to maintain biological life, but is able to see the ball, chase the ball, fetch the ball, and here you're calling him your good little boy when he brings you the ball. Shout out your dogs in the comments, guys. I love dogs. I'm not allowed to have them because in my apartment building, we can't have them. So if you have good dog stories, share them. I would love them. Or drop pictures of dogs in my DMs. It's the only time I'll invite you to slide into those DMs. I did this once recently and some of you really did it and I liked it. But Rufus isn't going to be asking you for geometry lessons anytime soon, as your little furry guy lacks an intellectual soul. And this is the part of the soul that Aristotle associates with human reason. Now, as you probably have already assumed, humans go 3 for 3 in terms of the soul parts, as we're nutritive, perceptual, and intellectual. So we can do the stuff that plants and animals can do, plus we can debate the ideas contained in a George Saunders short story with our friends. Aristotle's theory was popular as it made very clear sense of why humans were distinct from lower animals and plants. Medieval Christian philosophers loved this idea as it clearly explains how God made human beings the pinnacle of all creation. But of course, this theory didn't just lead to the exalting of human beings, but to the degrading of plants and animals, especially as it concerned moral value. For example, if you ate a human sandwich, you'd be institutionalized.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
But you can eat a sandwich filled with just about any type of animal flesh without any problems. Hell, it might even get you a point on your Jersey Mike's punch card. Thank God there's not a punch card you get for every time you eat a sandwich made with the meat of a guy named Mike from Jersey. If you're a guy named Mike from Jersey, shout out in the comments which part of your meat you think would be the tastiest. And of course, while we usually feel a moral obligation to other human beings, our moral attitudes towards animals varies wildly. As philosopher John Gray recounts in Feline Philosophy, some say that René Descartes hurled a cat out of a window in order to demonstrate the absence of conscious awareness in non-human animals. Its terrified screams were mechanical reactions, he concluded. Now, to be clear, this is just psychotic behavior. And while Descartes did say a lot of good stuff, we don't support feline defenestration. However, just imagine what would have happened if Descartes threw a person out of the window and said its screams were mechanical reactions. But as the Enlightenment raged on and philosophers hopefully stopped abusing their pets, humanism became a more and more dominant ideology. Now, the basic idea with humanism is that we have innate value simply by virtue of being human, not because God made us, and that our unique humanity is often exhibited via our capacity for rationality. And this sort of humanism led folks like unproblematic founding father Thomas Jefferson to argue that all men are created equal. An idea that might make some question their prior subjugation of some human beings for the sake of others. But in actuality, the boundaries of humanism were often used to justify further subjugation, as the people signing documents about all men being created equal practiced a type of humanism in which most humans were still basically animals, while a small subset were actually included in the circle of ethical humanism. So even the ethics of humanism created space for the dehumanization of others. For writer and philosopher Melanie Challenger, author of How to Be Animal, the idea of dehumanization goes back at least to Kant, who argues that we should treat humans as ends in themselves and never as means to an end. Now, for example, you should be nice to your buddy Greg because he's a human, not because his family owns a chain of movie theaters and if you stay on his good side, you get free movies and popcorn. Greg's last name? Regal. His name is Greg Regal. Now, the opposite side of this, and a position that Kant, to be clear, considers to be immoral, is when we use human beings simply as a means to an end, which leads to justifications of violence. You know, like, let's say, hypothetically, you dehumanize a group of people, and then you instrumentalize their life so you can take over their land and destroy their culture, and then use it for your purposes, or something like that. That'd be bad if people did that in real life. If that was a thing that happened all the time in real life that we just accepted as a normal thing, that would be bad. But it doesn't happen because of unproblematic founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson, who taught us a long time ago that that would be bad. Challenger, here citing philosopher David Livingstone Smith, writes about how this dehumanizing process works. True dehumanization not only denies humanity, but but attributes a subhuman essence to another being. This mechanism could involve the replacement of a human essence with that of a potentially dangerous organism, like a rat or a virus. Now, to go back to Aristotle, when we dehumanize, we treat someone like they only have two aspects of their soul, the nutritive and the perceptive. So if I convince myself that I'm properly human while another person or a group of people aren't really human, I can then instrumentalize them without a sense of moral responsibility, as my superior humanity is not beholden to their inferior animality. Now, much of this rests, of course, on the implicit truth that humans are better than animals. And of course, depending on whether you're a dog or a cat person, this may or may not ring true. John Gray tries to outline this distinction by contrasting the views of two philosophers, Montaigne and Pascal. Now, Montaigne said that man is the most blighted and frail of all creatures, in a departure from Christian philosophy, which puts humans on a special pedestal that God made for us. Montaigne felt that animals possess an innate understanding of how to live that humans lack. Now, for him, wrestling with life and desperately searching for peace and happiness are human flaws, not evidence of our greatness. But Pascal saw those same qualities as a sign that humans are special. He understood human uneasiness as an existential feeling that points beyond this world, writing, "Man's greatness comes from knowing he is wretched. A tree does not know it is wretched, but there is greatness in knowing one is wretched. It is the wretchedness of a great lord, the wretchedness of a dispossessed king." I hope you're not playing a game where you have to take a shot every time I said wretched, because that was a rough 30 seconds for you. So in one case, our inability to just chill and enjoy a simple existence makes us worse off than lesser animals. But in another, this anxious self-loathing proves that we are God's special little babies. Now, a version of this idea still exists in philosophy today, namely that human reason isn't some magical great achievement by nature, but a sort of evolutionary flaw, because surely the ability to be anxious over an unknowable future, or depressed over a past we can't change, or just generally existentially confused isn't really helping us do much to thrive and perpetuate our species. You know, put differently, sometimes it's hard to fully live when we're so painfully aware of our fragile existence. But like Freud and others have pointed out, this anxiety over death and existence leads humans to commit uniquely ruthless and destructive atrocities, way beyond anything that a rabid grizzly bear could conceive of. And our worst and most calculated acts of violence are committed via the establishment of cultural practices and traditions that reinforce the idea that we are the good ones who deserve to live, even if they need to die for us to do so. Now, Challenger notes in The Joy of Being Animal that this dehumanization helps generate in-group, out-group distinctions, in which those in the out-group are seen as inferior, savage, and animalistic. And often, the out-group becomes a sort of cultural scapegoat that the in-group can rally around. Now, in practice, lacking the specific cultural knowledge, customs, or even appearance of the in-group can lead to immediate dehumanization. Basically like the movie Mean Girls, but with much more intense consequences.
We don't do this a lot, so this is like a really huge deal.
We want to invite you to have lunch with us every day for the rest of the week.
Also, Mean Girls, the movie, uses animality as a metaphor throughout. I'm just saying. Also, we made a video on Mean Girls once. I wrote it, I was proud of it. No one watched it. You could be the change that I want to see in the world by watching the video right now. So go forth and watch our Mean Girls video. Leave a comment. Let's hype it up. That'd be fun. Do it for Lindsay Lohan. She's probably going through something and needs it. This is particularly true, Challenger notes, when people's worldview is threatened, thus making them even more fearful of death. She quotes psychologist Matt Model, who writes, "In particularly ghastly cases, people will support or participate in the killing of those who threaten their systems of meaning." So basically, our fear of death leads us to develop systems of meaning that then facilitate group identities. But when those identities are challenged by competing or alternative systems of meaning, this then increases death anxiety and leads us to commit violent acts against those who we perceive to be challenging our beliefs. To put that a little simpler, it's like we're so afraid of dying, we start these little groups to tell ourselves, we're not gonna die, you're not gonna die, we're all good, we're not gonna die. But then someone else has another group and they have another sort of justification for why they're not gonna die. And then we think if they're right, that means we're gonna die. So then we gotta kill them so they can't kill us. I don't know, are humans that good? Now things get even more gnarly when this anxiety is weaponized by those in power when they want to get folks on their side when they're committing horrific acts, whether they be nationalism-fueled wars or full-on acts of genocide. Now, one of the most historically significant uses of this sort of dehumanization as a political tool is colonization, in which one group of people occupies another group of people's land and often destroys cultures and communities and, of course, people in the process. Now, we see the seeds of modern colonialism in the work of philosopher John Locke, whose theory of property basically argued that whoever is the most capable of cultivating or taking care of land is the rightful owner. It's sort of be like if you went to someone's house and you're like, oh, you don't understand all the buttons on your really fancy TV. Well, I do understand how those buttons work, and I can make, the image look better. I can make everything work good, so it's my TV now. My TV. You leave my TV. Basically like that. Now, he perhaps not coincidentally also believed that indigenous people in pre-colonial America were less than humans. Now, the practical outcome of these theories was a philosophical justification for stealing land from native people under the pretense that they simply weren't rational enough to care for it with the skill and wisdom that their European colonizers could. I'm filming this the day before Thanksgiving, a holiday about Europeans that came over to America and then took land from native people because they could care for it better, but then they had dinner one time, so everything was good. Thanksgiving sucks. In the process, this logic created a clear distinction between the human colonizers and the inhuman or animal colonized. 20th century psychiatrist and philosopher Fenon was raised in a colonial system and later participated in the uprisings against French colonization in Algeria. He argued that the violence exhibited by the colonizer towards the colonized, and this violence was both literal and structural, effectively turned the colonized subject into an animal. And this animality further allows the colonizing power to treat indigenous populations like cattle. They are to work when needed, but without the rights or moral values of their European shepherds. Fenon notes that this process of dehumanization can then be internalized by the colonized. Because when you're continuously treated less than human, well, it leaves you accepting that reality and even reiterating that colonial logic in your own mind. Now, this leads Fenon to acknowledge that this type of colonial dehumanization breeds a type of animalistic violence in which the colonized animals lash out at the colonizing humans. And this, of course, brings up the sick irony that when Europeans carried out large-scale colonial projects, rife with violence, brutality, slavery, and ethnic cleansing, they were established societies who were spreading democracy and reason and sharing the love of Christ and all their wisdom and things of that nature. But of course, when the colonized subject fights back against these systems, well, they're violent animals or uncivilized terrorists, and we need to go there and take over and show them how we live. And as I mentioned earlier, this is exactly what Fenon noted in the conflict between colonizing France and colonized Algeria. In his introduction to Fenon's Wretched of the Earth, our old buddy Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that you who are so liberal, so humane, take the love of culture to the point of affectation, you pretend to forget that you have colonies where massacres are committed in your name. Sartre here is noting that underlying the dignified humanity of the great civilizations of the West are often horrible acts of dehumanization. Today, we can maybe think of this in more like economic terms, where all of our amazing technology and the culture that it produces only exist because on the other side of the planet, people work 18-hour days, 7 days a week in factories that have suicide nets, hypothetically. This led Fenon in his book Black Skin, White Masks to call for the creation of a new humanism, one that could combat the sort of enlightened European humanism that served as a moral justification for dehumanizing colonial violence. Now, this means that rather than colonized subjects needing to put on white masks in order to be humanized by their European colonizers, we need a humanism that doesn't create the human-animal distinction in the first place. Now, this sort of humanism would transform objects into subjects and elevate animals into humans. And it would recognize that to gain one's humanity at the expense of others is to destroy that very humanity in the process. And as a final thought, while no one at Wisecrack has seriously studied science since the 11th grade, it's worth noting that we feel like this is where biology kind of comes back into play. Now, we know that some people have used biology to do race science and justify dehumanization, but as far as we understand it, science actually tells us that humans are all pretty damn similar at a biological level. And a lot of the weird distinctions that we produce in culture aren't reflective of that biological or material reality. So maybe to better embrace our collective humanity, we first need to acknowledge our shared biological animality. What I'm really asking is, to quote the great scholar and poet DMX, where my dog's at. But hey, what do you guys think? Are humans just animals with pants on? Am I wearing pants under this desk? And what does this sharp human-animal distinction do to us as a society? Please let me know what you think in the comments. I'll probably read them. Now, in the meantime, thank you so much for being here. When you watch our videos and when you leave comments and subscribe and share, all those things, it really does help us out, like a whole lot. So we really appreciate it. I really mean that. If you want to go one step further in supporting our channel, consider checking out our Patreon. There's a link in the description. You give us a little bit of money every month, and in return, we give you some extra content, some videos that you get a little bit early, things of that nature. And it's really great for us because we're less dependent on ads and algorithms and more dependent on you, a human being. In the meantime, remember that that puppy sleeping in your bed at night is really an animal, and you don't know what he's really capable of. I'll see you next time, if you make it that far.